Some dogs stop barking when the world gives up on them. Snow drifted sideways across the training yard outside the Alberta Provincial Police K9 Academy, turning the floodlights into pale halos trembling in the dark. The cold carried that deep prairie silence Canada knew too well in January, the kind that settled into your lungs and stayed there. It was nearly 9:40 p.m., long after most handlers had gone home, yet one Doberman still stood alone inside the fenced evaluation ring. His black coat glistened with melting frost beneath the lights, lean ribs rising slowly with each careful breath. A faded tactical leash dragged through the snow behind him like something forgotten. Onyx. K9 Candidate 47. Failed. The word had already been stamped across his file in thick red letters less than 20 minutes earlier. Aggressive tendencies. Unpredictable response pattern. Poor command retention. Unsuitable for active service. The instructors did not sound angry when they said it. Just tired. That was worse. Officer Nolan Mercer watched from beneath the overhang near the equipment shed, one gloved hand wrapped around a paper cup gone cold hours ago. The wind pushed loose snow across his boots while voices echoed faintly from inside the academy building behind him. Dog's got something wrong in the head. Should have washed him weeks ago. No handler wants that liability. Nolan said nothing. He kept his eyes on the Doberman. Most rejected dogs barked. Some lunged. Some paced themselves into exhaustion. But Onyx only stood there staring at the gate long after the last trainer walked away. Like he still expected someone to come back for him. The overhead speakers crackled once before shutting down for the night. Somewhere beyond the compound, tires hissed along an icy highway. A freight train moaned low through the darkness east of Edmonton. The entire yard smelled of wet leather, diesel exhaust, and frozen pine drifting in from the tree line beyond the perimeter fence. Onyx slowly lowered himself into the snow. Not dramatically. Not defeated. Just careful. As if exhaustion had become familiar. Nolan took another step forward. The Doberman's ears twitched immediately. Alert. Watching. But he did not growl. Did not bare his teeth. Snow clung lightly along the scar near his shoulder where old fur never fully grew back. Nolan had seen enough traumatized police dogs to recognize the signs people missed. Hypervigilance. Silence. Flinching at sudden metal sounds. Not aggression. Survival. A pair of academy instructors exited the side door carrying clipboards and thermal mugs. One noticed Nolan standing there. Mercer. The older trainer sighed through a cloud of breath. You're still here. Nolan nodded once. Could ask you the same. The instructor glanced toward Onyx and shook his head. Don't waste sympathy on that dog. We tried everything. Another trainer laughed quietly. Animal doesn't trust anybody. Nolan looked back toward the Doberman sitting alone under the lights. Snow gathered slowly along the top of his narrow muzzle. The leash remained attached to his collar, half buried now beneath the drifting white. Maybe, Nolan said softly, nobody gave him a reason to. The trainers exchanged tired looks before heading toward the parking lot. Their boots crunched away into the storm until silence returned. Then something small happened. So small another man would have missed it completely. Onyx stopped staring at the academy gate. And for the first time all night, he looked directly at Nolan. The storm deepened after 10 o'clock, swallowing the academy grounds beneath sheets of drifting white that blurred the floodlights into trembling gold circles against the dark Alberta sky. Nolan remained beneath the overhang long after the other vehicles disappeared from the parking lot. Snow gathered across the shoulders of his navy winter jacket while the paper cup in his hand had gone completely cold. Still, he stayed. Onyx had not moved much either. The Doberman remained near the center of the training ring, silent and watchful, amber eyes fixed carefully on Nolan now instead of the empty gate. There was no challenge in that stare. No threat. Just caution worn thin by disappointment. Nolan knew the look better than he wanted to admit. 5 years earlier, another police dog had looked at him that same way from the back of an ambulance after a failed highway interception outside Red Deer. Copper. Belgian Malinois. Best K9 partner he had ever known. Nolan still remembered the freezing rain striking the pavement that night, the flashing red and blue lights reflecting across wet asphalt, and Kappa's tired breathing slowing beneath his trembling hand. Some memories did not leave quietly. They stayed in the bones. A gust of wind rattled the chain-link fencing around the yard. Onyx flinched almost instantly at the metallic sound. Not aggressive. Anticipating impact. Nolan finally stepped away from the overhang and crossed the snow-covered concrete toward the ring. His boots crunched softly beneath fresh powder. The Doberman stood the moment he approached, muscles tense but controlled, leash trailing behind him like a shadow. Nolan stopped about 2 meters away. Close enough to matter. Far enough to leave dignity intact. Steam drifted from both their breaths into the frozen air. You don't like loud places either, huh? Nolan's voice came low and steady beneath the wind. Onyx did not respond immediately. His cropped ears tilted slightly forward while his eyes searched Nolan's face with unsettling intensity. The Academy had labeled him unstable. Dangerous. Unfit. Yet Nolan had worked narcotics, missing persons, and patrol support long enough to know real aggression usually arrived loud. Chaotic. Proud of itself. This dog carried something different. Fear taught too many times. Nolan crouched slowly, careful not to force the movement. Snow soaked through the knee of his uniform pants almost immediately. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out half a turkey sandwich wrapped in paper from the vending machine inside the station. Best meal in Alberta, he muttered dryly. Try not to judge me. He placed the sandwich gently onto the snow between them and leaned back. No commands. No pressure. Onyx stared at the food but did not move toward it. Instead, his gaze stayed locked on Nolan's empty hands. Watching. Measuring. Waiting for the part where kindness usually disappeared. Minutes passed in silence except for distant wind sweeping across the prairie and the soft buzz of power lines overhead. Finally, slowly, the Doberman stepped forward. One paw. Then another. His movements remained cautious, almost graceful despite the tension coiled beneath his frame. He lowered his nose near the sandwich, sniffed once, then looked back up at Nolan again before eating. Small bites. Careful. Nolan felt something tighten quietly in his chest. Not pity. Recognition. The kind that hurt worse. Yeah, he whispered into the cold air. Someone taught you trust comes with consequences. Snow continued falling around them in soft silence while the academy windows behind Nolan reflected pale yellow against the storm. Somewhere inside those walls sat a file already deciding this dog's future. Transfer. Isolation. Maybe worse after enough failed evaluations. Nolan glanced down at the leash half buried beside Onyx's paws. Thick black nylon. Regulation issue. Cold and stiff with ice. The Doberman noticed him looking at it and instinctively lowered his head slightly, body bracing for correction before none came. Nolan exhaled slowly. Then he reached forward with deliberate care and unclipped the leash from the collar. The small metal clip fell away from the collar with a soft sound almost swallowed by the wind. Nolan slowly lowered the leash into the snow between them and stepped back without speaking. For a moment neither of them moved. Snow drifted through the training yard in slow silver ribbons beneath the floodlights while the cold pressed against every surface like silence made physical. Onyx remained frozen where he stood, amber eyes fixed on the leash now lying loose at his feet. Dogs knew the language of restraint better than humans ever would. Chains. Gates. Commands barked through clenched teeth. Every correction left a memory somewhere inside the body. Nolan could almost see the confusion working behind the Doberman's stare now. The expected order never came. No sharp tug. No warning. No punishment for hesitation. Just open space between them. You can walk away if you want, Nolan said quietly. His breath curled pale into the Alberta night. I am not stopping you. The Doberman's ears flicked once against the wind. Somewhere beyond the academy grounds a snowplow groaned along the highway, amber warning lights flashing faintly through the storm. Onyx slowly lowered his gaze toward the open gate Nolan had left behind him. Freedom stood less than 6 meters away. Nothing blocked the path except drifting snow and darkness beyond the perimeter road. Nolan stayed perfectly still. He knew forcing trust too quickly shattered it. The cold seeped through his gloves while he watched the Doberman consider the impossible. Then Onyx took 3 careful steps forward. Not toward the gate. Toward Nolan. The movement was so quiet it almost hurt to witness. The Doberman stopped beside him but did not touch him. Close enough to hear breathing. Close enough to leave if fear returned. Nolan looked down slowly. Frost dusted the top of Onyx's narrow muzzle while melted snow darkened the fur around his paws. Scars crossed the dog's shoulders beneath the short black coat, old marks hidden beneath discipline and silence. Yeah, Nolan murmured softly. I know what it feels like when everybody already decided who you are. The academy yard lights buzzed overhead. Far inside the main building, a radio played low country music through somebody's office wall before fading again beneath the storm. Nolan bent carefully, picking up the discarded leash from the snow. Instantly Onyx stiffened. His muscles tightened beneath the coat. Eyes lowered. Bracing. Nolan noticed immediately. Instead of clipping it back onto the collar, he folded the leash slowly and tucked it into his jacket pocket. The Doberman looked up again, uncertain now. Nolan gave the faintest nod toward the parking lot. Come on then. He turned and began walking across the icy pavement toward his truck without checking whether the dog followed. That part mattered. Trust could smell desperation. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he crossed the lot toward an aging dark blue Ford pickup layered in road salt from weeks of prairie driving. The wind sharpened near the open spaces beyond the academy fence, carrying the scent of pine and diesel through the freezing air. Nolan reached the truck and opened the passenger side door with a heavy metallic creak. Warmth did not greet him. The heater barely worked anymore. Coffee cups and old case files covered the back seat beside a folded wool blanket. He paused before climbing in. Then he glanced sideways. Onyx stood several meters behind him near the edge of the lot, watching carefully beneath the falling snow. Still deciding. Nolan rested one arm on the open truck door. Your call, partner. The word slipped out before he could stop it. Partner. Something shifted faintly in the Doberman's expression at the sound of a voice that expected nothing from him except choice. The wind blew harder across the empty lot. Then slowly, without command or leash or pressure, Onyx crossed the snow toward the truck. The truck heater rattled awake with a tired groan as Nolan pulled onto the snow-covered highway leading south from the academy. Wind pushed loose powder across the pavement in pale waves beneath the headlights while the dark Alberta forest rolled silently beside them. Onyx sat upright in the passenger seat without touching the blanket Nolan had spread there for him. He stayed alert the entire drive, amber eyes fixed on every passing light, every shifting shadow beyond the windshield. Not nervous. Calculating. As though the world had taught him movement always carried consequences. Nolan drove with one hand resting lightly on the steering wheel, the other near the weak stream of heat blowing from the dashboard vents. Country radio played softly through static. Before fading into silence again. The truck smelled faintly of old coffee, wet wool, and cedar from the air freshener hanging crooked near the mirror. Every few kilometers Nolan glanced sideways toward the Doberman. Onyx never once tried to climb into the back seat. Never paced. Never whined. He simply watched. Snow tapped gently against the windshield while highway markers appeared and vanished in the storm like ghosts beside the road. Nearly 40 minutes later Nolan turned onto a quieter rural route lined with frozen spruce and scattered farmhouses glowing faint yellow in the distance. His cabin sat outside a small community west of Leduc, tucked near a frozen creek surrounded by tall pine trees bent under fresh snow. The place was modest. One floor. Old cedar siding. A porch light that flickered during bad weather. But it was quiet. That mattered. Nolan parked beside the woodshed and shut off the engine. Silence settled almost instantly around them except for the wind brushing through the trees overhead. Onyx remained motionless in the passenger seat. Nolan opened his door slowly. Cold air rushed into the cab carrying the scent of wood smoke from a neighboring property somewhere beyond the tree line. No pressure, he said softly while stepping out into the snow. You come inside if you want. He grabbed his duffel from the truck bed and walked toward the porch without looking back. The old wooden steps creaked beneath his boots. Frost coated the railing silver beneath the porch light. Nolan unlocked the door and warm air drifted faintly out from the small cabin, carrying the smell of pine logs and yesterday's coffee grounds. He set the duffel down beside the couch and moved toward the kitchen counter, shrugging off his heavy winter jacket. Only then did he hear it. Slow pause crossing the porch outside. Not rushed. Careful. Nolan turned slightly as the Doberman appeared in the doorway. Onyx paused at the threshold, eyes scanning every inch of the cabin with trained precision. The old couch. The cast-iron stove glowing low in the corner. The stack of police files beside the dining table. A framed photograph sitting face down near the bookshelf. Nolan recognized the hesitation instantly. Some animals had forgotten how to enter warm places without permission. "It is all right," Nolan murmured. "Nobody is going to yell at you here." Onyx stepped inside. Snow melted quietly from his paws onto the wooden floor while the warmth of the cabin wrapped slowly around him. The Doberman moved cautiously through the room, nose twitching as he absorbed unfamiliar scents layered into the walls. Smoke. Leather. Coffee. Solitude. Nolan opened a cupboard and pulled out an old stainless steel bowl, filling it with fresh water before setting it near the stove. Onyx approached slowly, still watching Nolan more than the bowl itself. Trust first. Need second. Nolan understood that too well. He leaned against the kitchen counter and studied the dog beneath the soft amber light overhead. Without the harsh floodlights of the academy, the scars along Onyx's shoulders showed more clearly now beneath the sleek black coat. Old marks. Some emotional wounds left physical echoes. The Doberman finally lowered his head and drank. Long, careful mouthfuls. Nolan looked away respectfully, giving dignity to the moment. Outside, wind swept through the pines with a low mournful sound while snow thickened against the cabin windows. Inside, for the first time in a very long while, the house no longer felt empty. Then something small happened again. So small most people would never notice it. Onyx finished drinking, lifted his head slowly, and instead of retreating to the far corner of the room, he quietly laid down beside Nolan's boots. Morning arrived quietly over the Alberta countryside beneath a pale silver sky heavy with fresh snow clouds. Frost covered the cabin windows in delicate white patterns while the frozen creek behind the property groaned softly beneath layers of ice. Nolan woke before sunrise the way police officers often did after too many years on rotating shifts. Habit. The cabin remained dim except for the faint orange glow from dying embers inside the cast-iron stove. For a few seconds he simply listened. Whined through the pine trees. The old refrigerator humming unevenly in the kitchen. Slow breathing somewhere near the couch. Nolan sat up carefully beneath the wool blanket draped across his shoulders and glanced toward the living room floor. Onyx was still there. The Doberman had not climbed onto furniture or wandered through the house during the night. He slept curled near the front door instead, positioned where he could see both Nolan and the windows at the same time. Guarding. Even in rest. Nolan rubbed tired eyes and reached for the old kettle resting near the stove. Soon the cabin filled with the smell of coffee and cedar smoke while pale morning light slowly spread across the wooden floorboards. Onyx lifted his head the moment the kettle whistled. Alert instantly. His ears twitched toward every sound inside the cabin before his gaze settled quietly on Nolan standing in the kitchen. "Morning, partner," Nolan murmured. The word came easier now. He poured coffee into a chipped ceramic mug and opened the refrigerator, studying its nearly empty contents with mild disappointment. Half a carton of eggs. Leftover stew. Some sliced turkey. Not much else. "You and me both," he muttered dryly. He cooked eggs slowly in an old cast-iron pan while Onyx watched from several feet away. No begging. No pacing. Just observation. The kind trained dogs never fully abandoned. Nolan eventually placed a plain portion into a bowl near the stove. Onyx approached cautiously but ate this time without hesitation. Hunger had finally outrun suspicion. Outside, snow continued drifting across the property in soft waves beneath the pale dawn light. Nolan pulled on his winter jacket after breakfast and grabbed an old flannel-lined coat from the hallway hook. He crouched slowly beside the Doberman, careful not to invade space too quickly. "Let us try something." Onyx stiffened slightly as Nolan held out the coat. The movement alone carried old memories. Nolan could see it in the tightening muscles beneath the sleek black fur. Some dogs feared hands more than storms. "Easy," Nolan whispered. "No tricks." Slowly, patiently, he draped the coat across Onyx's shoulders. The Doberman flinched at first but did not retreat. Nolan adjusted the fabric gently around him against the bitter cold waiting outside. No commands. No force. Just quiet care offered without expectation. They stepped onto the porch together moments later. Snow creaked beneath Nolan's boots while cold air wrapped around them sharp enough to sting the lungs. The pine trees surrounding the cabin stood dark and motionless beneath layers of fresh powder. Morning silence stretched across the frozen landscape untouched except for deer tracks near the creek bed. Nolan began walking slowly toward the woodshed carrying an armful of split logs. Onyx followed several steps behind. Loose. Free. Yet always watching Nolan's movements carefully. The rhythm felt strange in the best possible way. No leash snapping between them. No shouted obedience drills. Just two living creatures learning the shape of trust one quiet step at a time. Nolan stacked firewood beside the porch while steam rose from his coffee mug into the freezing air. Onyx wandered cautiously near the tree lean, nose low against the snow. Then suddenly the Doberman froze. Completely. His posture changed in an instant. Head lifted. Muscles rigid. Eyes fixed toward the far edge of the property near the road beyond the trees. Nolan noticed immediately. Every police instinct inside him sharpened at once. Onyx did not bark. That made it worse. The Doberman stared into the snowy distance with a tension Nolan had not seen before. Fear mixed with recognition. Then from somewhere beyond the pines came the low crunch of slow-moving tires approaching through the storm. The sound came slowly through the snowfall, tires grinding over packed ice somewhere beyond the pine trees bordering the property. Nolan set the firewood down immediately. Onyx had not moved from the edge of the clearing. The Doberman stood rigid beneath the drifting snow, ears forward, chest still, eyes locked toward the road with a focus so intense it tightened something deep inside Nolan's instincts. Dogs reacted to danger. But trained dogs reacted to memory. "Hey," Nolan called softly while stepping closer. "Easy." Onyx did not look at him. The low rumble of the approaching engine grew louder through the storm until dark headlights finally flickered between the trees. A black police utility vehicle emerged slowly from the snow-covered road and rolled toward the cabin drive. The moment the vehicle appeared, Onyx's posture changed again. Not aggression. Worse. Fear mixed with recognition. The Doberman backed away one step, shoulders tightening beneath the flannel coat Nolan had placed over him earlier. Nolan noticed the subtle tremor run through the dog's frame before it disappeared again beneath discipline. The police vehicle stopped beside the porch with tires crunching softly against the snow. Driver's side door opened. Sergeant Dean Carver stepped out into the cold morning air adjusting the collar of his heavy winter jacket. Mid-40s. Broad shoulders. Clean-shaven. The kind of officer who carried authority like a permanent expression. Snow landed across his dark gloves while he scanned the property with tired blue eyes. "Mercer," Dean called over the wind. "You planning to answer your phone sometime this century?" Nolan forced a faint smile. "Depends who is calling." Dean shut the vehicle door and approached the porch slowly. "Chief heard you took the reject dog home." His tone sounded casual, but something underneath it felt measured. Calculating. Nolan crossed his arms against the cold. Temporary. Dean's gaze shifted toward Onyx near the tree lean. The Doberman had gone perfectly still now, watching Dean with unbroken focus. No barking. No growling. Just tension held so tightly it looked painful. Dean noticed it too. "See," he muttered. "Dog has problems." Nolan remained quiet. Dean stepped closer through the snow, boots crunching sharply across the frozen ground. The moment he came within several meters, Onyx lowered his head slightly and released a low sound deep in his chest. Not loud. Barely even a growl. More like a warning dragged unwillingly into the open. Nolan glanced sideways immediately. This was different from fear. The Doberman's stare had sharpened into something else now. Recognition. Dean stopped walking. There it is, he said coldly. Exactly what I warned the academy about. Onyx did not break eye contact. Snow drifted silently between them while wind brushed through the pine branches overhead with a soft rattling whisper. Nolan studied the dog carefully. During the entire night Onyx had shown restraint. Hesitation. Careful observation. But now every muscle beneath the sleek black coat had locked tight the second Dean arrived. He has not acted like this once around me, Nolan said quietly. Dean gave a short dry laugh. Congratulations. You are special. But the sarcasm landed strangely flat. Nolan noticed something then. A smell drifting faintly through the cold air. Sharp. Metallic. Familiar. Gun oil. Strong enough even he could catch traces of it beneath the snow and diesel fumes. Onyx's ears twitched instantly at the scent. Dean shoved gloved hands into his pockets. Chief wants the dog back by tomorrow morning. They are arranging transfer paperwork. Onyx's low growl deepened slightly. Dean's jaw tightened. You hearing this? Nolan nodded slowly, but his attention stayed on the Doberman. Fear alone did not create reactions this focused. This personal. Dean shifted his weight slightly and the movement exposed a deep scratch along the side of his leather duty bag near the zipper seam. Old damage. Several parallel marks. Nolan's eyes narrowed subtly. Onyx suddenly stepped backward through the snow, never taking his eyes off Dean once. Not retreating. Positioning. Watching. Then the Doberman turned and disappeared silently into the pine trees behind the cabin. Dean exhaled sharply. That dog is unstable, Nolan. Wind swept snow across the driveway between them. Nolan kept staring toward the dark forest where Onyx vanished moments earlier. Somewhere deep among the trees, a raven cried once into the gray morning sky. Then Nolan spoke very quietly. Or maybe he remembers something he should not. Dean left less than 5 minutes later, but the heaviness he brought with him remained long after the police vehicle disappeared beyond the snow-covered road. Nolan stood alone near the porch while wind swept through the pine trees in restless waves overhead. Fresh snow had already begun covering the tire tracks in the driveway as though the storm itself wanted to erase evidence of the visit. Somewhere deep in the woods behind the cabin, Onyx still had not returned. Nolan rubbed a gloved hand slowly across his jaw and stared toward the dark tree line. The silence bothered him more than barking would have. Dogs disappeared for many reasons. Fear. Confusion. Instinct. But something about the Doberman's reaction to Dean Carver felt older than simple anxiety. Personal. Nolan stepped back inside the cabin briefly and grabbed his flashlight from the kitchen counter along with an old wool cap hanging near the door. The warmth inside suddenly felt fragile now, temporary against whatever tension had entered the property that morning. Before leaving again, he noticed something near the stove. Onyx's water bowl remained untouched since Dean arrived. Another small thing. Another detail most people ignored. Outside, the cold had sharpened further as afternoon clouds darkened over the Alberta countryside. Nolan followed the fresh paw prints leading toward the forest beyond the frozen creek. Snow creaked beneath his boots while the beam from the flashlight swept across thick pine trunks and low branches heavy with ice. The woods smelled of cedar, frozen earth, and distant chimney smoke drifting from neighboring farms kilometers away. Onyx, Nolan called softly into the trees. No answer came except the wind. He kept walking. The tracks wound carefully through the forest as though the Doberman intentionally avoided open ground. Smart movement. Tactical even. Nolan noticed the pattern immediately. Not random fear. Controlled positioning. Nearly 20 minutes passed before he finally spotted movement ahead near the edge of the creek bed. A black shape stood partially hidden among the pines. Motionless. Watching him. Nolan lowered the flashlight slightly. You done hiding from me? The Doberman remained still for several seconds before slowly stepping forward from the shadows. Snow dusted his back and narrow muzzle while his amber eyes stayed fixed behind Nolan toward the distant road rather than on Nolan himself. Alert. Listening. Nolan approached carefully until only a few meters separated them. He scared you, Nolan murmured quietly. Onyx's ears twitched at the sound of Dean never being spoken aloud yet somehow understood. Nolan crouched slowly near the frozen creek, knees sinking into fresh snow. You know him. The Doberman lowered his head slightly. Then something changed. Onyx suddenly stepped closer and pressed briefly against Nolan's shoulder before turning again toward the road. The contact lasted less than 2 seconds, but it carried more trust than any obedience drill ever could. Nolan felt it deeply enough to hurt. A branch cracked faintly somewhere behind them. Onyx reacted instantly. His head snapped toward the sound and a low warning rolled through his chest. Nolan rose quickly, flashlight beam cutting through the trees toward the noise. Nothing appeared except drifting snow and dark trunks stretching endlessly through the forest. But then he saw it. Fresh boot prints crossing near the edge of the creek. Not his. Large. Deep. Recent enough that snow had not fully filled them yet. Nolan's stomach tightened immediately. Somebody else had walked through the property after Dean left. Onyx moved beside him silently now, every muscle locked with focus. Nolan followed the print several meters through the trees until they abruptly stopped near an old wooden fence post half buried beneath snow. The beam from his flashlight caught something tied loosely around the post. A strip of black nylon. Nolan reached down slowly and picked it up. Part of a damaged training leash. Frayed at the edges. Frozen stiff. He turned it over in his gloved hands while Onyx stared at it with quiet intensity beside him. Then Nolan noticed faint lettering still visible near the torn metal clasp beneath a layer of ice. K9 Unit 12. Nolan's heartbeat slowed sharply. He knew that designation. Every officer in the provincial department did. K9 Unit 12 belonged to Officer Graham Holt and his Doberman partner nearly 2 years earlier. Official reports claimed Holt died during a winter narcotics operation near the docks outside Calgary after an equipment failure separated him from backup in severe weather. Case closed. Tragic accident. But now, standing in the silent woods with Holt's damaged leash frozen in his hand and Onyx trembling beside him beneath the falling snow, Nolan suddenly understood one terrible thing. The Doberman had not been abandoned after all. He had survived something. Snow continued falling through the forest in slow quiet sheets as Nolan stared at the frozen strip of nylon in his hand. K9 Unit 12. The letters looked small beneath the flashlight beam, almost insignificant against the endless Alberta winter surrounding them. Yet Nolan felt the weight of them settle deep inside his chest. Officer Graham Holt's death had shaken every department across the province nearly 2 years earlier. Holt had been respected. Experienced. Careful. The official report described a failed narcotics interception during a blizzard near an industrial shipping yard outside Calgary. Communications lost. Backup delayed. Exposure to severe weather. Tragic but explainable. Nolan remembered attending the memorial service himself. Closed casket. Folded flag. Quiet speeches beneath gray skies. Nobody had ever mentioned a surviving Doberman. He slowly looked toward Onyx standing beside the frozen creek. The dog remained fixed on the damaged leash, muscles tense beneath the falling snow. Not confused. Remembering. You were his dog, Nolan whispered softly. Onyx lifted his gaze immediately. The wind shifted through the pine branches overhead carrying the scent of distant chimney smoke and approaching snowfall. Nolan crouched carefully, boots sinking deep into the snowpack near the creek edge. What happened to you? The Doberman stepped closer this time without hesitation. Not fully trusting. But no longer hiding either. Nolan noticed the scars along Onyx's shoulder again beneath the black coat. Old injuries. Poorly healed. Injuries never included in academy intake reports. Somebody had erased parts of this dog's history before he ever arrived there. Nolan folded the damaged leash carefully into his jacket pocket and stood. Come on, he murmured. We are finding answers. They returned to the cabin just before dusk settled over the countryside. The storm outside thickened steadily while darkness swallowed the forest beyond the windows. Inside, the cast iron stove crackled softly, filling the room with warmth and the scent of burning cedar. Nolan sat at the small kitchen table with his old department laptop open beside a mug of untouched coffee gone cold again. Onyx rested near the stove but remained alert, ears twitching toward every sound outside. Nolan typed slowly through archived police databases, old provincial reports, and inactive K9 unit files while Snow tapped softly against the cabin windows. Graham Holt's case file appeared after several minutes. Official cause of death confirmed exactly as Nolan remembered. Severe weather complication during covert narcotics surveillance. Body recovered 36 hours later near abandoned cargo storage lots outside Calgary. No mention of missing evidence. No mention of a surviving K9. No mention of Onyx at all. Nolan frowned deeply. Police departments did not simply lose trained K9 partners without paperwork. Every animal carried records more detailed than most officers' medical files. Vaccination logs. Deployment evaluations. Handler notes. Yet Onyx existed nowhere before the Academy rejection report filed 3 months earlier under unidentified transfer intake. The silence inside the file felt deliberate. Nolan leaned back slowly in his chair. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Onyx suddenly lifted his head toward the laptop screen. A low sound rumbled quietly in his chest the moment a photograph of Sergeant Dean Carver appeared within an old task force roster connected to Holt's final operation. Nolan's eyes narrowed instantly. Dean had worked the same narcotics unit the night Holt died. The Doberman rose slowly from beside the stove and approached the table with careful steps. The moment Dean's face filled the screen, Onyx stiffened hard enough to shake slightly. Not aggression. Recognition sharpened by fear. Nolan felt cold despite the warmth of the fire. "You know him," he whispered. Onyx's gaze never left the screen. Nolan clicked deeper into archived files searching for after-action details. Most records remained heavily restricted, but one overlooked equipment inventory report finally opened halfway. Missing evidence bag logged after storm recovery. Internal discrepancy unresolved. File closed pending review. Nolan's heartbeat slowed. Missing narcotics evidence. Holt dead. Surviving Doberman erased from records. Dean Carver present during the operation. Outside, wind struck the cabin walls harder now, rattling the old windows beneath the growing storm. Then suddenly headlights swept across the front room through the snowfall outside. Nolan froze immediately. A vehicle had pulled into the driveway. Onyx reacted before the engine even shut off. The Doberman moved silently between Nolan and the front door, body low, ears forward, every muscle locked with terrifying focus. Nolan stood slowly from the kitchen table while the cabin lights flickered once overhead. Outside, heavy boots crunched through fresh snow toward the porch. Then came 3 slow knocks against the front door. The knocking came again. Slow. Measured. Not loud enough to alarm neighbors that did not exist 4 kilometers around, but firm enough to announce authority. Snow hissed softly against the cabin windows while the porch light flickered through the storm outside. Nolan stood near the kitchen table without moving, one hand resting lightly beside the open laptop screen. Onyx remained planted between him and the front door, silent as stone. The Doberman's body had changed completely now. Gone was the cautious uncertainty from the academy yard. This was focus sharpened by memory. Nolan could almost feel the dog listening beneath the storm itself. Another knock echoed through the cabin. Then Dean's voice came muffled through the wood. "Mercer. Open the door." Onyx's low growl deepened instantly. Nolan glanced down at him. Easy. But the Doberman did not relax. Nolan crossed the room slowly and unlocked the door without fully opening it. Cold wind rushed inside carrying snowflakes and the sharp scent of diesel fuel from the idling police vehicle outside. Dean stood beneath the porch light wearing a heavy winter coat dusted white across the shoulders. His expression looked calm, but his eyes moved immediately past Nolan into the cabin searching for something. Or someone. "You ignored my calls," Dean said quietly. Nolan leaned one shoulder against the doorframe. "It is late." Dean's gaze shifted downward the moment Onyx appeared silently beside Nolan's leg. The Doberman stared at him without blinking. No barking. No lunging. Just that same unbearable recognition. Dean's jaw tightened almost invisibly. "I came to help you," he said. "That dog is dangerous." Nolan remained still. "Funny," he answered softly. He only acts dangerous around one person. Wind swept hard across the porch between them. Somewhere beyond the trees a branch cracked beneath heavy snow. Dean exhaled slowly through his nose. You are digging into files you do not understand. Nolan's eyes narrowed. I understand enough. For several seconds nobody spoke. The storm outside filled the silence instead, pressing cold against the cabin walls while Onyx's low growl vibrated softly through the wooden floorboards. Then Dean glanced toward the laptop screen still glowing faintly on the kitchen table behind Nolan. His expression changed. Just slightly. But enough. Nolan saw it immediately. Fear. Graham Holt found something during that operation, Nolan said quietly. Did not he? Dean looked away toward the falling snow. You should let this go. And the dog? Nolan asked. Was he supposed to disappear too? Dean rubbed a gloved hand across his mouth before answering. Holt would not back down. He wanted to report missing narcotics evidence tied to officers higher up the chain. Snow whipped harder across the porch now, swirling beneath the yellow porch light like ash. Dean's voice lowered. Things got complicated during the storm. Nolan felt cold settle through him deeper than winter. Complicated, he repeated quietly. Dean finally looked toward Onyx again. The Doberman stood perfectly still, amber eyes locked onto the men who smelled of old fear and gun oil and betrayal. That dog saw everything, Dean whispered. After Holt died, Onyx would not go near anybody from the task force. He snapped at handlers. Refused commands. We could not control him anymore. Nolan stared at him in disbelief. So you erased him? Dean's silence answered enough. Wind pushed snow across the porch in long silver waves. Inside the cabin, the old stove crackled softly behind them. Home. Warmth. Safety. Things the Doberman had almost lost forever because he remembered too much. Dean lowered his eyes briefly. I never wanted the dog hurt. Nolan looked down at Onyx beside him. The Doberman had stopped growling now. Instead he simply stood there between Nolan and the storm beyond the door. Guarding the one human who finally listened. Nolan slowly opened the front door wider and stepped back. Dean frowned slightly. What are you doing? Nolan's voice remained calm. Giving somebody one chance to tell the truth before I make the call myself. Snow drifted through the doorway into the warm cabin air. Dean stood frozen for a long moment beneath the porch light while the weight of silence settled over all three of them. Then finally, tiredness seemed to break through the hardness in his face. He lowered his head once. Defeated. Behind Nolan, Onyx quietly moved closer and rested against his leg without fear for the first time since the storm began. And somewhere beyond the frozen Alberta woods, morning waited patiently beneath the dark.